Welcome to ThimbleberryU. I'm Michelle Odell, your host, and with me again is Amy Walls. Today we're talking about conducting a beneficiary review. What is a beneficiary review, Amy?
First, beneficiaries, for our listeners, are the folks that you're leaving money to via a distinct designation on an account. So a beneficiary review is not necessarily your estate plan, your will, or your trust. It's who you've named on your 401k or 403b or IRA as either primary or contingent beneficiary. So this is money that normally doesn't pass through your estate. It's just money you're going to pass outright. Now, what a beneficiary review then is checking those documents to make sure that your beneficiaries named are who you actually want them to be.
Okay.
It sounds pretty simple. In reality, it becomes a little bit more complex.
Okay, so what does someone need to know about beneficiary designations to know if they are set up properly?
It's a great question because there's some background information is needed. I do, in conversations with clients, find that there's bits of information that they just don't have to recognize issues. As I mentioned, retirement accounts that have someone named and they all ask for it, that's a beneficiary designation. Also, you get beneficiary designations on life insurance policies, and you can add them to bank accounts. Okay, on a bank account, it's called a payable on death designation versus a beneficiary designation. Now here, I'm going to maybe blow some people's minds, but you can also, just like you can add it to a bank account, on a brokerage account, you like an individual account or a joint account, you can add what's called a transfer on death designation. It's not a default. It's actually very much seeking this out, just like with a bank account, to say, I want a designation on this account so that it transfers directly to whoever I have named. So as a default, we always try to put a TOD, transfer on death, designation on brokerage accounts for our clients. Some people go, what's a TOD? Because we'll often refer to this as a TOD account. Some people joke it's the death account because I can just remember that. Oh, it's my account that I've added something separate to it. So the reason you want to add beneficiaries to these is it passes directly and it doesn't pass through your estate. Here's why. Let's say you just have a will.
Okay.
And you don't have beneficiaries designated, or you name your will as the beneficiary. Okay? Which is not a great idea usually. There are instances where it might make sense, but it is not something, any listeners, please don't think I'm recommending that because I'm very much not.
Okay.
What happens when you don't have it or you've got your will is it has to go, the account, the transfer of money has to flow through probate, the court that administers wills. That process can be drawn out. It being drawn out means cost, so it gets expensive over time, and those assets are tied up. Let's say, for example, that you have a house as part of your estate that maybe still has a mortgage, and everything's going to your children. You've got 4 of them. Well, who's now going to pay that mortgage while all your assets are tied up in probate? You've just left it to your kids to figure out how to pay all those bills.
Okay.
Not lovely. No. And the headache of that, if you have a beneficiary designation, that money transfers immediately following production of death certificate and, some other paperwork, but compared to probate, very, very quickly to whoever is named as the beneficiary. Okay. So that's the reason you want these to be how you want them to be, right?
Right.
And insurance policies, same thing. It gives that liquidity that people, your heirs, may need right away, besides a gift when you're no longer here. Additionally, what's important to know is beneficiary designations override any instructions in a will or a trust. So this is a critical part of a complete estate plan and checking this information.
So what are the reasons someone should review their beneficiaries?
The big thing is life changes. And just to make sure that, whether that's life changes because maybe a new child is born, right? Something happy. Maybe it's a divorce. And so you don't want your ex-spouse as your beneficiary any longer. Those reasons. So it's just really ensure that who you'll be leaving money to, even though you're not going to be here to experience it, is who you want it to go to. So here's a great story, how this becomes important. I know somebody whose employer switched life insurance providers, basically changed the insurance company that was providing the life insurance for employees. And they happened to be checking their beneficiaries, and they found that when it switched from one company to another and they thought the beneficiary designations were coming across, they did not. And a default designation had been put in place.
Which
and
was?
It wasn't what they wanted. They were completely terrified, easily fixable.
Okay.
But it had been a year or so that this had been in place and they had no idea. So shifts like that may not go perfectly. And so that's something outside of what you'd be thinking is a reason I need to check my beneficiaries. So another example, I worked with somebody who had been divorced several years and their ex-spouse passed away. They were still the beneficiary on the life insurance. So they received it. Now, there were some children in the mix that probably the deceased intended for their children to receive this money. But once someone has inherited something, now they're dealing with gifting issues in order to give it to, in this case, his children, in order for what we can assume was probably the intention, and this was just an overlook, to happen. Right. And you can't always get around those gifting issues.
What tips do you have for conducting a beneficiary review?
So first of all, in doing this, what I'd do is create a list of all financial accounts, from bank accounts to retirement accounts and life insurance policies, and then identify who is listed as a primary beneficiary and a contingent beneficiary. Now, this takes a little bit more digging than just pulling a statement because most custodians do not list beneficiaries on statements. So this is oftentimes more of a go back to original account setup paperwork, or if you've got an online portal, it's probably listed somewhere in there in order to find the information. It may also be a good idea to jot down the type of account and the dollar figure of the account, especially if you think you may have more complex beneficiary designations than spouse as primary and kids as contingent. And why I say that is, let's say you want to give equally to nieces and nephews and such. It may be helpful to know how much is in each account, because you might say, I've got 4 nieces and nephews. I want them all to get 25% of each account. So that's a fairly easy beneficiary designation. But it might be that you look at it and say, no, I'd rather just name one of them on each of these 4 accounts and call it good. So having everything together at one time, I've found makes that easier for people to think through how they want to do that. Another reason is maybe you want to give to charity, okay? And of the different account types, the best kind of account to give to charity is a 401k or IRA, because the charity won't pay taxes the way an individual will.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
And so just knowing those dollar figures is helpful. There's also some tricks where it's best not to leave money to a charity and a person on the same account. So if you want a charity to get half of something and a person to get half, you may even want to split that into 2 accounts. And that is because, and it's not the purpose of this podcast today, but the way people inherit money is different than how an organization inherits money. And there's some subtleties in the rules that the people lose the benefits and all their choices, if you will, if there's also a charity named. Then other things to consider would be, once you have that information, do you like how it is? Are there life changes that have happened for you or some of your beneficiaries that might impact and cause you to want to make changes based on your prior decisions? Once you think you have it, especially if you have an estate plan in place, talk to your attorney. Are there any complications or subtleties like what I just mentioned that you might not know about? We don't know what we don't know. Also talk to your financial advisor about this. And if your financial advisor is just saying, do whatever you want, seek a second opinion, because your financial advisor ideally is going to help you understand the differences and the choices that you're making. If they're not, they're more of just an investment advisor, and you may want a more well-rounded picture. And then because you know where the accounts are held, you'll need to update beneficiary designations. For some firms, you may be able to do that online. So 401ks, for example, you can do that online most of the time. Some companies are going to require that on a form that is signed in order to have those changes made. It's paperwork that goes on file that they want to track, because when you do pass away, they want, okay, they signed this at this date and this time. This is the last one. We know that. It's very clear.
Okay, so what are other things our listeners need to consider when looking at how to do a review?
So other things to consider would be primary versus secondary beneficiary designations. I mentioned these, but I realized I didn't explain them. So I'm glad you asked this question. So a primary beneficiary is when you pass who the money should go to. Contingent beneficiaries would be the second tier. So let's say that, Michelle, you pass away and your primary beneficiary is alive. Then the contingent beneficiaries don't matter, because all the money goes to your primary beneficiary or beneficiaries. You can have one, you can have multiple in either the primary or contingent category. But let's say you hadn't done a beneficiary review and you had one primary beneficiary named and they've passed away. Now all of that money is going to go straight to the contingent beneficiaries. Okay, so it's really your backup plan.
Okay.
Because we all know we're going to die once.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to die a second time. We know that, but our beneficiaries may have already passed. Other considerations would be things about maintaining your beneficiary designation. So perhaps rather than needing to compile this information on a yearly basis, and I do think people need to look at this at least yearly, it's keeping a clear record of what it's been so that it's easier for you to find it. It's also easier for your heirs when you do pass away to know where the accounts are and know how to get access and such, and just what to expect. I think especially for those folks that have children, one of the things they want to do in leaving this money to their children is having their kids be prepared. And if it's a significant amount of money, you don't want this to be when your kids fail. You want to have prepared them and help them, and them knowing it's coming, knowing what's happening, have had conversations about your wishes, may be a really great gift.
That is an excellent way of looking at it. That let me get everything worked out for you. So here's a question then. And again, I can cut this, but so let's say, my husband and I, we work with you. You're our financial advisor. You do the whole thing for us. He passes away. Is it the type of thing where I could just make one phone call to you? Would that just naturally happen because you helped us with everything in the first place?
It would naturally happen. And so what I mean by that is, let's say that you've each got some individual accounts, retirement accounts, and you've got some joint accounts. Maybe it's a trust account, etc. But let's go with just a joint account that's not in a trust right now. So when you make that call to us, first, there's going to be, of course, some condolences and what do you need in this moment? But shortly after that, as soon as you're in a space to do so, we're going to be talking about, and we'll have it ready, your joint account needs to be retitled in your name. His individual accounts have beneficiaries listed. So here's what we're going to need in order to start distributing those funds to the appropriate accounts, and here's what the choices are. There's things we can't handle, like bank accounts and such, but we're going to have a checklist of, okay, here's what you're going to need to do in order to move through that.
Well, anybody out there that has any questions, wants to know more about this, how do they contact you or anybody from your office?
Yes, they can give us a call, the old-fashioned telephone at 503-610-6510, or find us online at ThimbleberryFinancial.com.
All right. Well, in the meantime, have a wonderful summer, and we'll talk to you soon, Amy. Thank you so much.
Sounds good, Michelle. Thank you.
discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Thimbleberry Financial are not affiliated.